just to kind of lay things out, I'm going to give a little bit of an overview of beyond coal and where energy is in Ohio to lay the table for where we are with House Bill 6 repeal, and then going into some of where we're expecting things to go next year. Just because I think it's really important that we really have a good sense of where we're at in terms of not just the legislature, but energy in general. So yes, Neil Waggoner, I'm the senior campaign rep with the Beyond Coal campaign. In my role, I oversee all of our coal work in Ohio. So I oversee our organizing efforts, our legal team, and organize and coordinate our legal efforts, our organizing team, as well as our communications and some of our lobbying efforts as well. So the Beyond Coal campaign, it just passed its 10-year anniversary with the Sierra Club. It's the largest nationwide campaign the Sierra Club has ever run, and it has also been one of the most distinctive and successful campaigns, starting with the original goal to stop a number of this huge coal expansion that was proposed during the Bush administration, and then morphing into not just stopping new coal plants from being built, but replacing the coal fleet that as it existed, and to decarbonize. Then finally, with the stage we're moving into now, looking to finalize the retirement of the coal fleet and really decarbonize the rest of the electric sector. And the reason for that is because the electric sector is previously was the big driving force of carbon emissions, the driving force of climate change, in the environment. And we are, through the retirement of coal plants, we've actually been very successful, and we've seen CO2 has moved the electric sector has moved from the top emitter of CO2 to now we see transportation really taking over as the top emitter. Now there's still a lot of CO2 to get out of the air, and we need to drop all of these sectors, but this is progress. And again, a lot of this has been driven by the reduction in coal. And you can see here on this slide, really, in the past decade, we've had just how substantial the amount of coal that has retired across the country is. We set a goal a number of years ago of retiring or announcing for retirement over half the coal fleet by 2020, and we reached and exceeded that goal, in no large part because of a lot of efforts that happened here in Ohio. And this is something really important to consider when we are talking about House Bill 6 and what the status of this bill is, and the repeal efforts on it, because we are seeing coal is retiring across the country, and it's very clear that coal is at its end. We will, within a very short period, comparably, no longer have coal generation in this country, and that is really necessary if we are going to be serious about tackling climate change. And this trend here really shows that, just in how much has been retired or announced for retirement in the past 10 years. And this slide is actually from 2020, we were at 50%. I think the number is closer to 186 or 87,000 megawatts now. You can just see with this has come a substantial decrease in SO2, in NOx, and in of course, CO2. And while the challenge here is, though, that while we've seen this significant drop in coal, we are seeing an increase in clean energy. We really need to see this increase in clean energy development significantly increase. So we are seeing a trend here where clean energy development is increasing, but we need to really accelerate it. And we are seeing in a number of parts of the country where that's happening. Of course, this is always, again, the context of House Bill 6 and the things that the bill bailed out versus the things that we actually need right now. And before we get into the details of House Bill 6, again, I want to lay the table for where we are in Ohio, where we were in 2010 versus where we are now. You can see in the left-hand corner, and I am not an artist or a graphic design person at all, so really this is all from some work that our friends over at IEFA put together, and then I just used some Microsoft Paint. But you can see where we were in 2010 with just a significant amount of coal generation around the state. There were several new plants proposed at the same time. 5 years later, most of these plants were either retired or were in economic hardship. A number of the plants that were in economic hardship, Samus, Cardinal, Conesville, Zimmer, Miami, Ford, Kill Stewart were all seeking bailouts at the PUCO at this point. And then finally in 2020, at the beginning of the year, you'd see all the crossed out coal plants were plants that had then retired. And by the end of really 2020, not only are all these plants that are crossed off retired, but Avon Lake was announced and will retire early next year. Samus will retire. The final 4 units at Samus will retire no later than 2028. Cardinal, which has 3 units, one of those units will be retiring no later than 2028. Miami Fort will retire no later than 2028, and the Zimmer plant will retire next year, leaving really then only the Gavin plant, Kiger Creek, and the final 2 units at Cardinal as the only large coal plants left in the state that do not have retirement date. Ohio, actually, I know that there are a lot of things that Ohio is very frustrating for, but in terms of coal plant retirements and retirement announcements, Ohio leads the nation. No other state in the country has retired or announced for retirement more coal than Ohio. And this is significant also because, while from an environmental perspective, that's great. We have, and from a public health perspective, that's phenomenal. But at no time has this state ever done anything to actually provide real support for community transition or for a future for where these for these communities that were so dependent on coal plants. Another thing that was never part of House Bill 6 and is still absent from a lot of the repeal discussions. So with that kind of laying the groundwork, let's talk about House Bill 6 itself, which has, by David DeVillers, the former U.S. attorney that was in charge of bringing the case of House Bill 6 to the front. DeVillers noted that this is probably the House Bill 6 and the effort to get it passed in the legislature was probably the largest bribery and corruption scheme in state history. And spoilers, there's a lot of House Bill 6 that's still in place, and the GOP leadership in the House and Senate is doing everything it can really to not move forward with any further repeal efforts, which means that it's up to us to continue to put pressure on the legislature and make sure something does move forward. So let's talk about the major components of House Bill 6 and to just kind of as a reset for what was in the bill, what was some of the things that were particularly egregious with it. Now, there was a lot here, but these were kind of the main areas. Notably, the thing that got all the attention at the time was that it provided a direct bailout to Energy Harbor, former First Energy affiliates, Perry and Davis-Besse nuclear plants, would have provided about $1 billion bailout to that. It extended, expanded, and fundamentally altered the previously approved OVEC coal bailout. This is a big deal. This is now something that is seen as being actually even bigger than the costs associated with Perry and Davis-Besse, and keeps really old coal plants online for a really long time. It also lowered Ohio's renewable energy goal from what it was previously, I was just 12.5%, a pretty meager 12.5% to 8.5% and sunset in 2026. That means that at the end of 2026, we don't even have to have an 8.5% renewable goal or renewable requirement, that we could go back to 0 renewable. It also more or less ended Ohio's energy efficiency goals. It said that we changed them up a number of ways, and by changing it up meant that we hit the goal that had been altered and sunset the goals, meaning that the utilities did not need to do big energy efficiency programs anymore. It also did not provide any information on how the utilities could even do voluntary programs, which is a big deal. And then finally, it created this decoupling mechanism for First Energy, which would result in major windfall of profits for the company. This has to do with how utility rates are set, and this was something that really benefited First Energy, no one else, and was very expensive. So let's talk about a timeline, and I think that these 2 pictures really say a lot about the timeline with House Bill 6, where you have up top Larry Householder. This first picture was from when he was laying out to reporters what was in House Bill 6 and why it was such a great idea. And this is, of course, a picture of the day of his arrest, when the criminal complaint came out. And this is him, being escorted out of the courthouse in a protest that came together pretty quickly. So House Bill 6 was introduced in the spring of 2019. And after a lot of, without recounting a lot of the controversy behind it, it eventually passed through the legislature on a very slim vote. There was a lot of dark money that was being spent. Everyone was aware of it, but no one could everyone figured it was coming from First Energy, but no one could really keep track of it. Same thing in the fall of 2019, when there was a major effort to take House Bill 6 to the polls and have a referendum. There was a lot of dark money that was spent against to stop the referendum. A lot of shady characters that were involved with that. Again, a lot of people felt like it was that this was likely First Energy that was backing all of that. Of course, nothing came out of that time. The referendum fell short. And then things kind of got quiet, right? We didn't hear a lot. Ohio was the laughingstock of the nation, and people were felt it was pretty ridiculous just what happened with this bill. And then in July of 2020, early in the morning in July 2020, Larry Householder and associates, a number of associates were arrested, and it became clear, and the FBI, the Department of Justice, put out information about exactly this money laundering scheme that happened and what was behind House Bill 6. And it seemed like that was going to lead to pretty quickly to repeal of the bill. There was a lot of talk in the legislature about repeal and a lot of calls for it. After not saying much for a few days, even Governor DeWine, certainly who has never really been a fan of or a big proponent of clean energy, even came out and called for repeal. And this was followed by some really big events that happened in the early fall, with first in October of 2020, Chuck Jones and a number of members of First Energy's leadership being fired. And then, of course, in November of 2020, Sam Randazzo, the chair of the PUCO, a longtime lobbyist for big energy users and dirty polluters, who had been appointed to be the chair of the PUCO, the FBI raided his house. It became clear that he had taken a lot of money directly from First Energy, and he resigned from the PUCO. So it seemed like we were going to get repeal pretty quickly. There was a lot of efforts. Sierra Club members and supporters spent a lot of time on this. For anyone on the presentation tonight who did, really, really appreciate the efforts last year. However, by the end of December, the GOP caucus in both the House and the Senate were very divided on what should happen with repeal. And they tried moving forward several kind of repeals or things that would have paused things but weren't real repeals, but nothing could get enough traction. And we went into the election, and then after the election, in which largely thanks to partisan divides and the gerrymandering in the state, no individual who voted in favor of House Bill 6 lost their seat. And the only person who did lose their seat was a Republican who actually voted against the bill and turned state witness. So this was not, I think a number of the Republicans did not want to move forward at all with repeal. However, there was still a lot of public outcry for it, and this led into the beginning of 2021 with there still needed to be an effort. Finally, I'll just note here that in July of this year, we had First Energy entering a deferred prosecution agreement with the Department of Justice about their part in the House Bill 6 corruption scheme, and it was in this deferred prosecution agreement that a lot of new information came out, including very clear outline of the significant bribery of Sam Randazzo to benefit First Energy. And while no charges have been filed against Randazzo yet, I think that we're all seeing in the papers at this point just how involved he was in all of this corruption as well. Okay, so 2021, new legislature, same nonsense. As I mentioned, we did not get repeal in 2020, and what we saw is really the GOP trying to run out the clock. and their caucus was divided. A lot of them didn't want to do much of anything, but there was still a lot of attention on the legislation and the need for and public calls for repeal. And again, just month after month, new information was coming out about just how bad the corruption was and the need to do something about it. So let's go through and talk a little bit about where we are with each of those component parts with repeal, because what we've seen is that while no repeal in total bill got any real progress, any real momentum through the legislature, we have had bits and pieces of the legislation repealed, and then we have other pieces that are kind of in progress, or things that are related to repeal that have passed or in progress. Here, of course, we have Representative Cupp, who is the Speaker of the House, and we have here Senator Huffman, who is the Senate President. Both of these folks have dragged their feet. Both of these folks have also caused some real issues with clean energy moving forward, especially Senator Huffman, who is no fan of wind energy. So let's talk about where we are, though. Let's start with the good news first, which is in March of 2021, House Bill 128 did pass the legislature. And this bill repealed FirstEnergy's nuclear bailout, or Energy Harbor's nuclear bailout. This meant that there would be no money that would actually be going to FirstEnergy for its 2 nuclear plants. It also repealed FirstEnergy's pretty ridiculous decoupling mechanism. So this is good. Unfortunately, this also resulted in a lot of legislators, Republican legislators, that really said, like, well, we did this thing, so we don't really need to do anything more. We have repealed the particularly offensive part of House Bill 6, so we don't need to do anything more. So while this moved early in the spring, it has been a real uphill battle to get a lot of the other things done. Now, I will note that one of FirstEnergy's big arguments for the bailout originally was that if they didn't get this bailout, both these plants would be closed immediately. They'd even filed for retirement notices at PJM, the regional grid operator. And as of this year, that has not happened. New retirement notices have not been filed. And if anything, these plants are increasingly finding new sources of money with, in July of this year, FirstEnergy signing a power purchase agreement with a crypto mining operation to provide power, or to sell power for these operations, which in itself is just, crypto is a really developing field of real climate concern, because the crypto mining just takes so much power, and it's oftentimes being tied to some really expensive, old, outdated, and dirty plants that need to be retired. We also have multiple ongoing audits of FirstEnergy that are happening at the Public Utility Commission. There are a number of shareholder lawsuits that are happening, and of course, the company is on the hook for paying for this deferred prosecution agreement, as well as a number of reimbursements through the Public Utility Commission. But again, I want to close this out. While this was all really good news to get this part of the bill, the nuclear bailout, repealed, there is still, within the GOP majority in the legislature, this feeling like they did what they needed to do, and they are trying to declare victory and just move on, which is making it pretty hard to get anything else move forward. In terms of renewable energy and the energy efficiency goals for Ohio, this is where things are less positive. Even before the passage of House Bill 6, I want to make sure it's very clear. Renewable energy, the state's renewable goals and efficiency goals were things that were not very popular with the Republican majorities. And we had multiple pieces of legislation over the past years that the Republicans pushed forward to either freeze the standards, to get rid of them altogether, to modify them. This was a recurring thing, with almost every year there being some piece of energy legislation geared towards doing that. And up on the screen here, a couple of the folks that have been very influential in this, or influential in trying to stop renewable energy from moving forward. We have, of course, State Representative Bill Seitz, who has been a long time opponent of renewable energy. And then below him, Senator Gary Reineke, who has been a lead proponent of anti-wind efforts in the legislature. So, even when House Bill 6, the corruption became clear with it, there was not a lot of momentum from the GOP to reinstate Ohio's renewable and efficiency goals. And if anything, while there were significant chunks of House Bill 6 that were controversial on both sides of the aisle, it was never particularly controversial in the GOP majority about the repeal of the RPS and the renewable goal and the efficiency goals. They were always generally in favor of this. This is despite, of course, that we have had really renewable, goals around renewable energy are very popular and have been growing across the country. And even in Ohio, while we have not had much effort on from the state to increase our renewable goals or do anything with them, just really pulling them back, we have cities that have really taken the lead here with communities like Cleveland and Cincinnati and now Columbus, pursuing 100% clean energy and renewable energy aggregation contracts. Lots of cities that have passed Ready for 100 resolutions. And then we have a big campaign, the Powering Clean Future Ohio campaign, which is getting cities across the state to pledge to carbon reductions over the next 10 years, often being driven by aggregation contracts. So again, we haven't seen a lot of state policy on that. In the state policy we have seen that's come out for renewable energy in the wake of HB6 has frequently been pretty bad. Notably, we have Senate Bill 52, which passed this year. And this bill, it creates a lot of new barriers for wind and solar development across the state. Currently, if you want to build a wind farm or a solar farm over a certain size, you have to go to the Power Siting Board and you have to get approval for it. There's a lot of steps. Senate Bill 52, and the same is true. You got to do a lot of steps if you're going to build, whether it's wind, solar, coal, gas, nuclear, whatever. You went through this state siting board. Senate Bill 52 changed that in that while it pulled out wind and solar specifically and required some additional steps, including allowing for counties to create exclusion zones and to stop projects from moving forward. This is really notable as, nothing was created there was no parity when it came to creating new exclusions or restrictions around gas or coal or nuclear or anything like that. It was just wind and solar. And this is really coming up because we've seen a lot of folks, a lot of NIMBY groups that have been organizing around wind and solar in parts of the state. As despite a lack of state action, there's been a huge growth in renewable energy development in the state. So, this bill passed this year. It has a real possibility of slowing down renewable growth in the state, but we do have a lot of renewable energy that is being developed, including currently around 8,000 megawatts of solar has already been announced or is in the pipeline at the Power Siting Board, and there's a ton more that has been that's in the early development phase in PJM. So that's the bad news. Some stuff that's on the good news. That's good news, but it's very much in the works right now, is House Bill 389. This is a bill that would actually allow the utilities to start doing voluntary efficiency programs again. Not as good as the mandatory programs we previously had, but still it's something. It's something to start getting the utilities to be able to start doing energy efficiency programs to reduce energy waste across. Shockingly, Bill Seitz, our friend over here, is actually one of the dual sponsors of the legislation. So he has, kind of a weird message from him, but it's good. It's good to see that this bill is getting some attention. It passed out of House committee with unanimous support a couple of weeks ago, and we're actually expecting it'll be on the House floor soon, maybe even this week. We're gonna have to see what happens in the Senate, but this is important progress to move forward. Additionally, we have House Bill 450, which would authorize community solar to start happening in Ohio, up to 2,000 megawatts of that, and an additional 1,000 megawatts that would be specifically for development on distressed lands, brownfield areas. So we're really looking at areas like where former coal mining or coal plants were sited. This is a really good bill too. Community solar is something that we've long wanted to see happen in the state, but it's been pretty restricted on how that happens. So this is exciting. This bill was just introduced, and I think it's had 2 hearings. Sierra Club members came out, some strong support there. Kathy Cohen Becker, I know, provided testimony and did a great job with it. but it's definitely going to take some work to get over the finish line. It's definitely not a done deal, even though it's got strong support in the House, where it's been introduced as a bipartisan bill. Then, of course, the final kind of big component of HB6 repeal that's got a lot of attention and has not gone anywhere is, of course, the repeal of the OVEC bailout. This is really the meat and potatoes for my work, and it is very frustrating. The OVEC plants, Clifty Creek in Madison, Indiana, Kiger Creek in Cheshire, Ohio. These are plants that were constructed during the Eisenhower administration and have been losing money for years. But because of a weird ownership construct where utilities across multiple states, about a dozen utilities own tiny chunks of the plants, they've created this really weird construct that has made it very difficult to pursue retirement of these plants. And of course, here in Ohio, they have been getting bailouts for a while. And the thing is, the bailout of these plants are getting worse. The costs are going up. They are expected to have a lot of capital investments at these plants that are only going to make the costs even more. And the Ohio Manufacturers Association, which has done a couple of analyses of the bailouts, have really shown that at this point, they are likely to cost even more than the original nuclear bailout, so north of $1 billion. We have legislation that has been introduced in both the House and the Senate to repeal the OVEC bailout and to actually get rid of it altogether. Senate Bill 117 in the Senate, Senators Romanchuk and Craig, a Republican and a Democrat, and House Bill 351, Lenise and Sofas in the House, 2 Republicans. Both these bills have received multiple hearings, but unfortunately, they're both at the point where for additional hearings, it would likely be bill markups and possible votes. And it doesn't seem like we have the votes in either committee. The Beyond Coal campaign, our excellent organizers, Molly Nichols and Becca Pollard, have been doing work. Many of you have probably heard from them at some point to try to get additional attention around this legislation, because we're in a tough spot. Like we really need this legislation to move, but the utilities are really pushing hard to keep these ridiculous bailouts of these super old, dirty, unneeded coal plants in place. This week, we actually have a big event happening at the State House where our organizers, working with Ohio Citizen Action and the Ohio Environmental Council and a number of other small organizations, are going to be protesting at the State House in support of OVEC repeal, and will be delivering coal to all of the legislators that have not signed on to repeal legislation at this point. So that is happening on Thursday. And I know that folks are down in Cincinnati, but even if you can't come up for that, definitely Thursday is a good day to make a call to some legislators and call for OVEC repeal. And if you need numbers or materials, always can help with that. So 2022, what's on the horizon? Just kind of very generally, it's an election year. So there's going to be a lot of legislation introduced. It's going to be a little bit hard to discern the signal from the noise and what's actually going to gain momentum, and that a lot of people are going to be staking out positions and saying we did this, that, or the other thing, and a lot of it's going to be tied to what happens in November. So that we're going to probably see a bunch of action right before the summer break, the start of the election season, so right before Memorial Day. And then we're likely to see another flurry of action right after the election, as we are going into the end of the year, and we'll have a number of legislators that will obviously be leaving or retiring or have lost. So, we're looking at a couple of really big moments of crazy things that are possible. There was a lot of bad energy legislation that was introduced this year that just never moved. We'll need to be keeping an eye on that. Legislation that limited community choice aggregation, legislation that made it even harder for wind and solar development. But in general, it's seeming like the legislature has been pretty apathetic towards doing anything else regarding energy. They are definitely burned out, as we have just had so many energy related things over the past couple of years. And that's both a good and bad thing. It's good in that when the legislature is very active in energy legislation, bad things tend to happen. It's bad in that things like OVEC repeal still needs to move forward, and we really need to see things like House Bill 389 and 450 move forward. Speaking of those, kind of these three key pieces of legislation I noted, I think that these are the three bills that are going to get the most energy attention kind of moving forward. 389, that is the voluntary efficiency programs. Again, strong support in the House. Senate's is really up in the air. And it's a very important piece of legislation. So we'll kind of see what happens. Again, I think that there's going to be a lot of action in the Senate, but it's not guaranteed to pass. House Bill 450, the community solar bill. It's got good support in the House, but it's definitely, not a done deal. So definitely are going to want to see what we can do to support that. In general, a lot of the reason that it hasn't really moved, it's not clear if it's going to move forward, is the utilities and the retail energy providers have always kind of been at odds when it comes to community solar, with the utilities wanting to rate base it and the retail energy suppliers really wanted to just offer it as a product. So it's a little bit of a turf battle, and it's very frustrating because it is a little bit of a turf battle when really everyone wants to see it move forward, but it's really coming down to who's going to own it because it's a big business. So this is a big piece of legislation that, again, needs support. If you're meeting with a legislator, this is one of those things that you can say, like, this is popular. I'd love to see it happen. Then, of course, OVEC repeal. We've talked about this. It is stuck in, the two pieces of OVEC repeal, 117 and 351. They're both stuck in their respective committees in the Senate and House. And we really need to create additional support for this. So letters to the editor, talking to legislators, even talking to your local elected officials, because at this point, all of us are paying for the bailout of these plans, and we're just stuck with it. So, telling people that getting more and more attention on it is really what we need. And then I'll just kind of finish with things that are on the horizon. HB 429, the Energy Jobs and Justice Act. This is the piece of legislation that the Democrats have introduced in the House as kind of an alternative vision for energy in Ohio. This lays out an alternative energy policy for the state focused on carbon reduction, new programs to reduce energy waste, a focus on getting to 100% clean energy, as well as supporting communities in transition. So I mentioned those coal plant communities and coal mining communities at the top of the call, and how the state has never done anything to actually support them. The Energy Jobs and Justice Act would focus on providing money and opportunities and investment in those communities, which would be really important. It also lays out parameters for transparency and accountability at the Public Utilities Commission, and when it comes to the utilities themselves, and how much money they are giving, and how much control they have over the Public Utilities Commission, the regulators, and the legislature itself. It's a very big, kind of bold picture. I did not include a link here, but if you search for Ohio Energy Jobs and Justice Act, it'll take you to the webpage for it. Highly recommend you take a look at it. It's a good piece of legislation. I want to be clear. I want to be open-eyed. It's not going to pass as is. This is very much was introduced as an alternative vision and a starting point and a discussion piece, and something that folks can talk about and say, like, look, some better is possible. Bailing out coal and bailing out nuclear and letting corruption win the day should not be the energy policy that Ohio is pursuing. We can do better. We can do what many other states, many other folks around the country are doing. At this point, over 100 million Americans live in a community that has adopted 100% renewable energy goal. We can do better in Ohio. So I imagine that we're going to see more attention around the Energy Jobs and Justice Act as a messaging point, and we'll see Democrats talking about it a lot, and probably have some members of the GOP saying it's just not possible. But it is, again, it's an alternative vision, and I think it's going to get a lot of attention. All right, so with that, I've talked a lot. I think I went way over my 20 minutes. I think I was closer to 30 minutes, maybe a little bit longer. But I want to open it up for questions. I imagine there are some. And Kathy, should we open up for questions? Kathy, I think you are muted.
There we go. Now I'm sure you can hear me. Thank you. Are we partnering with any other is Sierra Club partnering with any other environmental groups to make a bigger statement to the legislatures?
Yeah, so Sierra Club works very closely. I can tell you that the groups we work, very closely with our friends over at Ohio Environmental Council, NRDC, Ohio Citizen Action, which has been, I know folks in Miami group are probably very well aware of them as they were headquartered out of Cincinnati. The Environmental Law and Poverty Center. We've worked with the Ohio Conservative Energy Forum. So yeah, on some issues, we've worked pretty closely with the Ohio Manufacturers Association. We're working with groups that are out there. But it has still been a challenge to get positive things moving through the legislature. And again, a lot of that is just to do with the kind of really partisan divide and our ridiculously gerrymandered lines, and the fact that a lot of folks want to turn energy into a political issue as compared to what it really is, which is should be a nonpartisan numbers in public health issue. But yes, we do work with other groups, work very closely with them. I know staff is always working with the counterparts of organizations, and then when it comes to local groups, always working with small local groups whenever possible.
I think you already asked, is Ohio still blocking wind? And the answer to that was yes.
Yeah, it definitely is. I mean, realistically, we have not seen significant new wind development in Ohio since going back to 2014, when the legislature, in a floor amendment on an unrelated bill, very quickly passed legislation to change the siting setbacks for wind. That was kind of like the point where wind really started slowing down in Ohio, and Senate Bill 52 is going to make development of wind even harder, and that's very frustrating. And yeah, the state is doing things to make it harder to see wind develop. But what I do want to say is, while wind has slowed down, the story is really at this point about just how much solar development is happening. I know, for years everyone talking about, how's not great with solar state? Well, that's not the case now. We have a huge amount of solar. Ohio is really in a lot of ways, one of the driving forces behind solar development in the Midwest. And in the next couple of years, we're going to see just a ton of solar that is built in the southwest and western part of the state.
When you say solar, do you mean on individual residents or as a large array?
So when I'm talking about utility scale solar, I'm talking about the large arrays. So we are at this point, like I said, mentioned earlier in the presentation, at around, I think, 8,000 megawatts of large arrays. So these are the things that are just like kind of big fields of solar panels that are in the power siting board queue at this point, or development phase at this point, and there's a ton more in the PJM queue. So we're seeing a lot of that, but I think we are seeing more development of the rooftop solar, and then of course with like a legislation, House Bill 450 that I mentioned, community solar, I think is going to be one of the big developing fields, and that is the solar on that is like this, the smaller solar facilities that you can buy into and get the benefits from directly, as compared to just going through a power provider. So I think that's like the next big frontier and one of the really exciting things.
A couple of other questions here. Mark Gilmore tells us that the city of Oxford, Ohio, is in the early stages of planning for a 1 to 2 megawatt solar array on a 20-acre former landfill. And he has included a link for that if anybody with an interesting name, duckduckgo.com.
Well, yeah, and I think a lot, we're going to see more of that too. A lot of cities are seeing that there's good financing for building and owning their own clean energy, can significantly lower the costs associated with facilities in the city. So we're going to see more of that. It's very exciting, you know, and we're going to see things like from on Oxford, which is just, you know, 1 megawatt, 20 acres, to like the city of Columbus, which voted for community choice aggregation last year. They're looking at signing agreements with you know, almost 500 megawatts, 450 megawatts of renewable energy, specifically in Southwest Ohio. So, you know, these community action, city level action, buying, you know, whether it's through aggregation or directly owning renewable energy, it has a huge potential to really drive forward clean energy in the state. I will say I'm hesitant to give too much props to the city of Oxford, see, as I am an Ohio University alumni, and I don't know how my friends in Athens would feel if I was giving too much props to the city of Oxford and Miami University.
We'll let you decide what you want to do. Another person has a question. Can you see the chat questions? It's rather lengthy, and I'd like for you to address it. It's from Gwen Marshall. And it's her question, or his question is, what is the Sierra Club's position on using old nuclear plants to provide power on the way to reducing carbon emissions? As a member of the Ohio Green Party Central Committee, the position is that old nukes are dangerous, and so are their waste byproducts. So we don't see a nuclear power as good for our future. Would you like to respond to that, please?
Yeah, I'm happy to, and that's a pretty easy response. The Sierra Club is an anti-nuclear organization. The Sierra Club does not support nuclear energy. Nuclear energy is not clean. You know, when you hear proponents of nuclear power talk about it, they always talk about its zero emissions, but they don't talk anything about the waste or the mining or the refining of nuclear byproduct and the byproducts that come from nuclear energy. Something that you know, what, 60 years in since we started really building nuclear plants, still hasn't been figured out. And something that, you know, came up pretty routinely, actually, what's going to happen with the Perry and Davis-Besse plants, you know, throughout the House Bill 6 saga. So yeah, that's a pretty easy answer to this. The Sierra Club is not in favor of nuclear energy and does not support that. We support a transition to 100% renewable wind, solar, geothermal, lots of programs to reduce energy waste, battery storage, things like that.
It is a quarter to late. I would like any person that's presently in our group to turn your microphone on and ask a question directly to Neil. And then if we have no questions, I'll kind of bring our meeting to a close, but I would like to have an opportunity for people to just directly ask you a question rather than putting it in the chat. So all you have to do that, participants, is unmute your mic.
So while people are wondering about that, there is a question in the chat from Mark Gilmore. I don't know, Kathy, if you saw it, but he says he's in Ohio's many rural electric cooperatives, and that he's saying that the rural consortium gets power from Cardinal plant, and he was told that the rural cooperative members don't pay towards support of Clifty and Kiger plants.
Yeah, so that is correct. So the rural co-ops are all tied in with Buckeye Electric Generating. Buckeye is the company that owns and they operate the entire Cardinal plant, but they actually own 2 units of Cardinal, currently Cardinal units 1 and 2. I'm sorry, currently Cardinal's unit 2 and 3. So yes, they are getting their power. They are getting power provided by that plant, which is kind of a thing in the future that need to be working with them on. However, when it comes to the idea that they are not paying for the OVEC plants, that is simply incorrect. And they might, you know, folks might think that they might like to claim that they are not providing a bailout for those plants, but they are directly paying towards them. Buckeye owns roughly, it's 18 or 19% of the output of the OVEC facilities. So that means that any of the costs or benefits, but really it's just costs from the OVEC facilities, are being paid by Buckeye's customers, which are the rural electric co-ops. So they didn't pay the new rider that was created to bail out the OVEC plants through HB6 because they're already paying for it. So it's not like anything like that they get some benefit by being, if you're a member of the co-ops, if you're a member of a co-op or a customer of a co-op, it's not like you're not paying for it. You already are. It's just, it's coming through your rates in a different way. And if anything, because of the way the co-ops are structured and because of the way oversight is done with the co-ops, there's actually been less oversight when it comes to how much they're paying for the OVEC plants than in previously regulated customers had before HB6. Similarly, in other states, we're starting to see action to limit OVEC costs. But that's not happening here in Ohio. So long story short, though, if you are a customer of a co-op, you are in fact paying for Clifty Creek and Kyger Creek.
So I have another question if nobody else, we can queue up, I guess, but so I put a note on my calendar for Thursday to make calls about the OVEC bailout because you said that's the day that everybody's going to be. So are there specific things that Sierra Club would like us to say or not say, or are there talking points that we can use, and who exactly should we be calling? Our local representatives, the Matt Huffmans of the world, or who should we be contacting?
So I think it's really, in terms of targets, your local rep should always be your first person. Your local rep and your local senator. Give them a call, start building a relationship with them. And I think that that's really important. Don't just call them up, ask for a meeting, ask when they're having coffee hours, ask if they're doing Zoom meetings, ask for them to join a group call to explain why they haven't, what their standing is on energy issues. Get to know them. So that should be your first call. After that, though, I would highly recommend calling the members of the Ohio House Public Utilities Committee and the Ohio Senate Energy and Public Utilities Committee. Those members are the folks that really need to be, across the board, as they are the ones who are considering legislation on the repeal of OVEC right now. They need to be hearing from us. They need to be told, like, look, you might not be my member, but you have a huge impact on my life currently because I'm stuck paying for this stupid coal plant bailout that you have chosen not to do anything with or do anything on. So I think calling, again, members of the Senate Energy and Public Utilities Committee, as well as the House Public Utilities Committee, would be really good. And I will note that the House Public Utilities Committee has Representative Linnies, who is one of the sponsors of House Bill 351, the OVEC repeal. Giving her a call and saying thank you for all you're doing is always appreciated. Similarly, on the Senate side, in the Senate Public Utilities Committee, Senators Romanchuk and Craig, who are the dual sponsors of Senate Bill 117 and have been pushing to get repeal through the Senate. Just as you're making calls through those committee members, leaving them a message just saying thank you for what you're doing. We appreciate what you're doing. Is always a good move. I, as a former legislative aide myself, I can tell you that offices don't often get thank yous. So if a member is doing something right, it's always appreciated to give them a good call. In terms of what to say, look, bailing out 60-plus-year-old coal plants that have been losing money for over a decade and are always going to lose money while they're putting out a ton of pollution. I don't really, it's pretty simple. We don't want to bail out coal plants. It's an indefensible bailout. There's nothing that's a benefit. And it's pretty crazy at this point that we still are doing it. So if I can give any advice on just what to say, it's really just that. Tell them, I don't want to bail out a coal plant. Repeal the OVEC bailout.
Neil, will you send to me the names and the committee like tonight or tomorrow, and I could get that posted on our website and then I don't know how we get this out to our whole membership. Are you sending out something through Sierra Club to all of the members in Miami group that, you know, contact your legislature? What's the mechanism to activate? We have, you know, 8,000 members in the Miami group.
Yeah, so a couple things. So yeah, absolutely. I can forward along where to find the contact information for the House and Senate folks. We have talking points for this legislation. And then, you know, of course, we've sent out action alerts. If you haven't seen an action alert, it might be buried in your email, or, you know, if you haven't gotten it already, we can forward on a link to you. Then, of course, our organizers, Molly Nichols, Becca Pollard. If you haven't gotten in touch with them previously, happy to put you in touch with them. They have been leading our organizing efforts on this. You know, so kind of doing the helping get LTEs written, helping set up legislative meetings, things like that. You know, they're the best to kind of talk to. I'm, of course, always happy to be a resource here. But if you want to know more on ways to get involved, I know that our organizers do a regular Beyond Coal action night, and we have the materials to put folks in, to help folks get themselves ready for, you know, contacting legislators, meeting with them, taking action. Happy to provide that information and pass it along.
Well, I'm thinking that we could easily have this as an article in our newsletter and also put it on our website. That's assuming a lot of people, one, read them or check them. Just thinking of the potential to, and how critical is that to do that quickly? I mean, this has been simmering for a while, so maybe it's not critical, but I would like to utilize those two existing methods of contacting our membership. And so if you give me the information, I'll try to write something up, or if you want to make a little blurb for me for that would be great as well, Neil.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. Happy to pass all that information on. And, you know, I want to emphasize here that we have been putting a lot of effort into this. And for anyone on the call tonight that has made a call, sent an email, your efforts are really appreciated. This is an issue that has, in terms of repealing parts of House Bill 6 and repealing the OVEC bailout and supporting clean energy. This is something that the Republicans, Speaker Cupp, Senator Huffman, Governor DeWine, they desperately want this issue to go away. And it's really activists on the ground that have made this an issue that won't go away. And it's up to us really to continue to create that momentum and to make that drumbeat stay happening, stay in their ears, and make them know that this is not something that they can just sweep under the rug, that they're going to have to deal with this. So yeah, it really is any means for getting additional information out there. And there's so many ways to take action, you know, calls, meeting with legislators, writing letters, doing LTEs, posting stuff on social media. All that's really important. It's just critically important right now, as we are going into a period that's going to be a little bit quieter. And then, you know, we want to make sure this is front and center again when the new year starts.
Okay, well, Neil, I've learned a lot tonight. I just wanted to give an opportunity for anybody who hasn't spoken up to say something. And are there, let me see if there are any other chat things that came up while we were, okay, we got one compliment that this was a good topic. Thank you, Jim. If we are done with questions, other than Lauren, you were about to say something. So would you go ahead and proceed with your comment?
I think Sarah has a question.
Okay.
You
Sarah,
mean me?
Yeah.
Are you talking about me? No, I was just thinking that what would be helpful for me would be to have, I really like the idea of having the names and phone numbers of folks to call. That you know, sending that out to everybody just really appealed to me as my next endeavor.
Yes.
Yeah, not a problem. We can get that your way. Yeah.
You'll get that to me, Neil, and I don't know what's the best way to get that out. I guess I'll get with Barry maybe on the best way to disseminate that. I don't know if I can send it to every person that was on our educational program tonight. If not, I'll try to find a way to do that. And I'll definitely post it on the website. And I will definitely get it in the next newsletter for reference but it can go on the website, I'm fairly sure, as soon as I can get that pulled together.
All right, thanks, Kathy. And for anyone that's interested, I put into the chat my contact information.
Oh, thank you.
Always happy to answer questions. Happy to put you in contact with our organizers. Whatever is helpful. Always trying to do my best to be a resource for Sierra Club members and supporters around the state, and anything I can do to be helpful. Always happy to be helpful.
So I do have a quick question, and maybe this is me just being very naive, but what possible arguments against this would any Republican senator or representative have? Like, what are they saying in support of continuing bailout?
So in terms of the coal bailout, we've seen the utilities have been very active in the legislature on this, and their reasons have morphed over time. The original argument that the utilities made at the Public Utility Commission and that legislators then tried to carry as well was the idea that if we lock in a bailout now, someday in the future, the OVEC plants, we know how much they generally cost, so maybe there'll be a benefit to customers by making sure they're online. The problem with that is that, one, the cost of the plants are going up. They're getting older, and the operators need to spend more money on them. And two, since the very first bailout of these plants that started at the Public Utility Commission, there has not been a single month that has gone by where Ohioans have seen any sort of credit or even broken even when it comes to the OVEC plants. For years now, that means that every single month, these plants are running at a loss. There's no defense of it on that front. We're also seeing now they're starting to bring up arguments that they're needed for reliability. That's not true. There's also arguments that and this is kind of one of the more absurd ones of many absurd ones, that by giving them a bailout, they are able to refinance some of their bonds and get a better rate of interest, meaning that how much they're having to pay is less. But again, it's really kind of ridiculous. The utility owners of these plants get to benefit from paying lower interest because of their bad business decisions, because we're financing it. At the end of the day, if the reality is, like, we could stop. We could all, the bailout of the OVEC plants could stop tomorrow. And the only change would be Ohio Electric customers would pay less on their bills, and the utilities, instead of being able to pass costs on to customers, would just have to pay for the cost of those plants from their profits. That's it. They made the decision that led them to being in a bad contract and those plants being in debt, but they're just passing on those things to us. So they don't really have good arguments. They don't have strong arguments at all. But what they do have is a pile of cash and a Rolodex of legislators that they're happy to meet with and pass that on to.
Well, it is approximately 8 o'clock. I want to say thank you, Neil, and I will be in touch with you and working toward energizing whatever we need to do here. I'm sure the energy groups that we have within the Miami group are doing things already. And I want to just thank you for taking kind of gone on questions at this point. We're about to end this conversation. So if there is anybody that's participating right now that wants to throw a question in, it's your last chance. Okay. Anything else you'd like to say before we leave the meeting, Neil?
Nothing to say. Just thank you, everyone, for coming on tonight. Thank you for the activism and the time that you put into volunteer efforts. And again, if there's anything I can ever be helpful with, feel free to reach out.
Thank you. And good night to all the participants this evening, and have a nice week.
Good for you. You did it. You lasted through the whole thing too. Good.
I
Right.
am. Okay, well, I'm leaving the meeting. Goodbye, everybody.